Welcome to Middle East Observer with me, Nicholas Richardson. Iraqi Kurdistan has, for the past 30 years, been the most peaceful part of a very unstable country and region. After the great crimes committed by Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein against Iraqi Kurds in 1988, when nearly 100,000 people died, the Iraqi part of Kurdistan has been an autonomous area since 1991. After the overthrow of the bloody dictator in 2003, Iraqi Kurdistan became the most peaceful area in a civil war-torn country. For political reasons, the status quo was maintained after 2003. Iraqi Kurdistan is almost independent, but still remains a part of Iraq, so the Kurds have their political representation in Baghdad, both in the parliament and in the presidential palace, because it is a Kurdish politician, according to the Iraqi constitution, who holds the office of the president of the country. Kurds are the most numerous nation without statehood. Since the end of World War I, their territories have been divided between Turkey, Iraq, Syria and Iran. In each of these countries, the Kurdish issue is very sensitive for the central government. In Syria and Iraq, the Kurds enjoy autonomy. In Syria, this autonomy results from the vacuum after the civil war, since when the Kurdish territories have not returned to the control of Damascus. The Kurdish problem affects Iran very much. Persians constitute only 60% of the Iranian population, and any concession to the Kurds could lead to the breakdown of the country's relationship with other ethnic or national minorities living there. Nevertheless, the Kurds in Iran, mostly Shiites, have their autonomy strongly inspired by the ideology of the Islamic Republic. Turkey appears to be very aggressively fighting Kurdish separatism in its territories in neighbouring Syria and even in Iraq. For decades, Turkey denied the existence of the Kurdish nation, called them Mountain Turks, and banned teaching or printing in Kurdish. Nevertheless, Turkey has an economic presence in Iraqi Kurdistan and conducts numerous businesses there. More than 40 million Kurds live in 4 Middle Eastern countries that rule over areas that Kurdish nationalists would like to unite to create an independent state of Kurdistan. This seems unrealistic at the moment. Even if Iraq and Syrian Kurdistan are autonomous, Turkey and Iran will not allow them to merge and create an independent Kurdish state. The Kurdish topic returned to the world's media in 2014 when the Islamic State spilled over the territories of Syria and Iraq. Jihadists in their march across northern Iraq and Syria encountered fierce and heroic resistance from Kurdish troops, for whom the Islamic State project was hostile not only to their national aspirations but also to religious and civilizational values. Kurdish troops, in which women also served on the front lines, held most of their positions with help from the West. However, with the end of fighting against ISIS, other problems arose. How can the West repay the Kurds if Turkey is one of the most important NATO members? Besides, both Kurds and Arabs, as well as Turkmen, took advantage of the post-war chaos to expend their ethnic possessions. It is not only about the land, but also about the oil deposits beneath the land. Iraqi Christians are particularly disadvantaged, as they often have nowhere to return to after their emigration caused by the war, as their villages or land are now already in different hands. And now I'm delighted to welcome back our guest, Sadar Satir, a journalist from Iraqi Kurdistan. Sadar, very good to have you back with us once more.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And now, following the recent conflict in Baghdad, the American embassy moved its embassy from Baghdad to Erbil, which of course is in Iraqi Kurdistan. And I wonder if you could say a few words about the relations between the Kurds and the Americans and the wider West. And in particular, I think many people have seen Kurdistan as sort of being a beacon of peace and hope in what has been a rather troubled country, and where there's been quite a lot of region indeed, where there's been quite a lot of anti-American sentiment. And as a subsidiary question, could I ask you whether there's any Iranian influence in Iraqi Kurdistan?
The relations between the Kurds and the strong ties between the Iraqi Kurdistan, particularly with the Western countries, dates back to a few decades ago, especially more particularly in 1991 when the first Gulf War started and the Kurds were under the threat of being massacred by the Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath regime. back then, the UN Security Council established the first no-fly zone in Iraq, and in order to protect the Kurds. So since then, the relations between the Kurds, especially the United States, France, UK, are very strong ties. And it is true, almost not only as part of the recent tensions in Baghdad, but every time when there is a tension and there is an imminent threat in Baghdad, the U.S. embassy and other foreign diplomatic missions, especially the Western ones, move heads of the missions to able for the security that we have here. And also the statement is correct and valid that Kurdistan region has turned and emerged as a beacon of peace in a very tough region. The Kurds have been enjoying sort of autonomy since 1991, and after 2003, when Saddam Hussein's regime fell and Iraq was liberated, the Kurds constitutionally built their own autonomous region within the borders of the Kurdish populated areas. Since then, the Kurdistan region has maintained its complete and full power and authority on its territories. It has a president, it has prime minister, it has a government, full government, and it has a parliament that handles legislation for running the region. And this has made the Kurdistan region a peaceful place because they are controlling their own territories outside the full control of Baghdad. Of course, it is still part of the Iraqi government, but it controls almost every aspect of a sort of autonomous or even independent state.
Yes, now, of course, rather interestingly, under the Iraqi constitution, the president, of course, is a Kurd. And that sort of helps keep the country together. And I wonder if you could say a few words about the attitude of President Salih and Kurdish political parties in general to the recent conflict that we've seen in Baghdad.
In Iraq, actually, there are three main presidencies: the president of Iraq, the prime minister of Iraq, and the speaker of the parliament. And since the country contains three main components, Shia Arabs, Sunni Arabs, and the Kurds, they have conventionally divided and reserved these positions for each component. As per a 2005 agreement, the position of Iraqi president is reserved for the Kurds. It's true that the position is ceremonial and it doesn't enjoy so much power according to the constitution, but its main duty is to watch the full implementation of the constitution. The performance of current president Barham Saleh, who is, by the way, a Kurd, is not very well satisfactory because under his watch, so many constitutional articles have been violated. And even for defending his own component, his own people as the Kurds, there have been 55 constitutional articles violated against the Kurds, and there has been no reactions from the current president. But the person who sits in the office matters itself. It is not only based on the constitution, but the person and the influence of that politician who occupies the seat is very important. After 2005, we had Mr. Jalal Talabani as the president of Iraq for 2 terms, and because he was a very well-known and a very internationally influential Kurdish politician, he could keep Iraq as a whole together and still fight for the constitutional rights of the Kurds. During his time, even he could manage bringing the Shia Arabs and Sunni Arabs together when there were conflicts, not only fighting for the Kurds. So the person who serves in this position matters more than the constitutional rights or jurisdiction that he has.
Yes, and I wonder if, from your perspective in Kurdistan, what you see of ISIS, and does ISIS still present a threat against obviously Kurdistan, but against Iraq generally?
Against Kurdistan, yes, but the threat is more directed to the wider region. We have to remember that ISIS is territorially defeated since 2017, but it has resulted now to an insurgency war. That means you cannot. There is no front line that defines the border between the state-controlled areas and the areas that ISIS still exists. They are in the mountains, in the deserts, and in the rural areas, and every now and then carrying out a terrorist attack targeting civilians or security forces. In Iraq and in the Kurdistan region, the threat is particularly in the areas called disputed areas. These areas are where the population are Kurds, but according to the current Iraqi constitution, they are not under the jurisdiction of the Kurdistan regional government, but they are being run by the Iraqi government. So they are called disputed areas. Within these disputed areas, there is not full control of the Iraqi army, and the Kurds are not allowed to interfere. That's why ISIS has exploited the security gap, or what is called security vacuum, in these disputed Kurdish territories to enjoy sort of freedom to regroup, reorganize, and even plan terrorist attacks. But it is not, as I said, it is not particular and specific for Iraq and the Kurdistan region. We have to remember that ISIS is still a very huge threat in Syria. In fact, in early January this year, we saw that there was an attempt of jailbreak in the Syrian Kurdish areas of Hasaka, where a huge prison containing thousands of ISIS militants, there was a kind of riot that hundreds of them managed to escape, but it required the international community and the global coalition to interfere and bring the situation under control. So there is a serious threat of ISIS in Iraq, Kurdistan region, and in Syria as well.
Yes. Now, of course, the greater Kurdistan region, of course, extends over the borders of several countries. And I was wondering if you could say a few words about the relationship between Iraqi Kurds and Turkish and Iranian Kurds. Do you see in the future Iraqi Kurdistan, which is this sort of beacon of peace and security, sort of becoming the sort of centre of a larger Kurdistan, or do you think there's still ethnic and linguistic differences which might put paid to this?
The Kurds, as I mentioned earlier, they were divided between these four countries based on an agreement called Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916. After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the Kurds were divided by the current political borders that we see today. But up to this day, there are more than 40 million of Kurds stateless in the world. And nearly 50 million of them are in Turkey, 12 million of them are in Iran, and more than 6 million are in Iraqi Kurdistan, and 3 million in Syria.
Sadia, thank you very much indeed for giving us your perspective direct from the region. That's fantastic, and it's lovely to see you again. Unfortunately, as ever, we've reached the end of the programme, but I would like to thank you for your contribution, very valuable, and hope we have a chance to chat again in the future. But meanwhile, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me, Nicholas.
A pleasure.
Thank you. A great pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for on this edition of Middle East Observer. Always interesting things to talk about. We could talk all day, but alas, we don't have all day in which to talk. And you probably don't have all day in which to watch. There we are. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Middle East Observer.